And I think there's so much about this moment that has gained power because of the way that it's operated on our exhaustion, right? That's made it feel as though we actually can't fight, and we need all of us in the fight.
Hello and welcome back to In the Meanwhile. I'm Marcus Harrison Green and I'm still trying to emotionally detox from this week's news cycle.
Seriously. And I'm Nora Kenworthy, wavering between moral clarity and moral exhaustion as we round out this year screaming into our decorative holiday pillows.
Nora, did you happen to catch the Kennedy Center honors, the one hosted by the actual president of the United States, who apparently decided that running the country now includes moonlighting as a bargain bin Ryan Seacrest for an award show that peaked around the same time as Will Smith's rap career?
Oh, yes, you must mean the ceremony that critics said felt like he revived the honors from the pet cemetery. And where the vibes were, you wanted the Four Seasons, but you got the Four Seasons total landscaping. No, I did not tune in.
I, well, count yourself lucky, my friend, because I gotta say, I wasn't prepared for the moment that he introduced the audience by saying, "Some I love, some I just hate."
Mm.
Can you imagine being roasted by a man wearing more bronzer than a real housewife at a reunion taping? Honestly, the whole night played like a parody of a parody. Supposedly rave reviews came in before the show even ended, and he's there calling people miserable and horrible. He also floated renaming the Kennedy Center to the Trump
Oh my
Kennedy Center.
God.
It was definitely giving, I didn't prepare for this, but neither did
I
America.
don't know how you
So,
could prepare for this extreme emperor has no clothes sort of moment. But I didn't subject myself to that, but I did watch the FIFA award ceremony
oh my
where
God,
Trump
yes.
got his quote unquote peace prize, aka autocracy participation trophy. Um, and I think it was equally embarrassing. Except the trophy was even uglier. It looked like, did you see the pictures of it? It was like golden zombie hands, sort of like clutching at a disintegrating earth. It felt very metaphorically appropriate.
Yeah, I was hoping that maybe the FIFA official was actually trolling him with that trophy, and he didn't quite pick it up, but
I don't know.
you know, I'll say that though. But like between that and the P Diddy documentary premiere this weekend, I truly could not tell you which problematic man was the final boss of of this weekend. My God.
Ooh, that or the Palantir guy on the interview.
Oh
And all the
yes,
drugs, yes. I
yes.
mean, truly, there's so many problematic men to choose from. It's like whack-a-mole, but the moles have lawyers and keep popping out of bunkers with ideas for destroying humanity.
Oh God, yeah. Touche, my friend. Touche.
Speaking of chaos on television, though, do you want to talk about the week-long corporate custody battle over Warner Brothers? Netflix announced that it was buying it, then Paramount stormed in like Succession cosplayers who brought real money, and then suddenly we were watching tech bros and Republican mega donors fight over who gets to have Batman and HBO. Like they're the like stepchildren of a divorce.
Yes, and also whatever is left of CNN's dignity too,
Yes,
to add that
fair.
in there. Jesus, yeah, and our president, bless his irritable heart, is now mad at Paramount because they aired an interview with Marjorie Taylor Greene that he felt made him look bad. It's like, sir, if MTG is your mirror, the problem is not the mirror. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh my gosh. I mean, eh, I it's important to remember that what actually kind of matters in all of this is that we have these mega donors who essentially own the entire media ecosystem. I mean, we have the Ellison family already owning CBS. They may partially own TikTok. They fund half the Republican Party. They could soon own CNN. I mean, like, truly, what a time to be in the media business. It's a real alien versus predator moment in the sense that no matter who wins, we lose.
oh God. Yeah, we're gonna have. I mean, it's not only is it a sense of this will be deleterious to the creative community, right? I mean, you're gonna have fewer writers and creatives and content that is original, and quite frankly, I can imagine that there will be fewer creators who are from historically marginalized communities.
100%.
So it's yeah, this is a big deal for everyday people, and it's also the fact that these mergers, many of this one in particular, is presumed illegal under antitrust law.
Yeah, not that that matters
Um,
anymore, but
as long as you're bringing various trophies to our dictator,
many
then
gold trophies, big ones.
many gold trophies to our dictator, then I think it seems like you'll be fine, right? I mean, my God.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, this is truly how you start to dilute and narrow the culture. Not with book ban. Well, also with book bans. I mean, we do that
yes,
too now.
yes,
Also language bans, but also
very
with
true.
corporate mergers. Thank you, corporate overlords.
Oh, yeah. But also, I we had some other chaos this
Did
week,
we?
and we it's just rolling chaos
Dang
is the
it!
day. But this latest move is just the height of petty and just also just my God, narcissism. It's the administration is ending free national parks admission on MLK Day and Juneteenth, and instead making the parks free on what day would you guess, Nora? What it just what do you what comes to mind? Just top just top of your mind. What day do you think is now free?
July 4th.
That's actually a pretty good guess. I mean, if you were
No,
if
no,
you were just
no,
going
no,
for
wait. Thanksgiving.
I mean, I mean, also very good.
Columbus
It
Day.
jeez,
Sorry.
maybe Robert E. Lee Day too. I did throw it in there. So this one's actually just maybe not too far. It's President Trump's birthday
Nice.
that is now free to get into the national parks.
Nice.
So there you go.
Yeah, he also put himself on the pass. There used to be like beautiful pictures of the parks on the pass, and now you have his ugly tanned face. I mean,
Oh
you're
God.
so right. Like, it's such petty racism. Like, it's like knife to the gut racism all the time. And yeah, it's just a lot to swallow.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like they're just rebranding American history, and Black history, I guess, does not make the cut.
Yes.
And it's even though Black history is, synonymous with, I don't know, American history.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Jesus. I'm saying that a lot today because that's what can you do? But I always say, like, I didn't even know that MLK or Juneteenth were free days to begin with, and that is completely on me and my ignorance. But two, I will say, this is to your point. It's, I mean, these are the only holidays that are honoring Black history, and they're the ones that get erased.
Yep.
And and then third, which is almost the most egregious to me, is that I learned that I share a zodiac sign with the president.
Ew. I'm sorry.
Yeah, June.
Yeah.
They were Geminis, man, and
Ugh.
frankly, I am filing an emergency petition to the universe to be reassigned.
Did he
'Cause
really
this is
even get born like on the human calendar though? Like, does he get a zodiac sign? I don't know. I think you're safe.
Okay, well, when you're spawned from hell, I guess that's fair enough. Fair enough. Anyway.
This whole conversation makes me remember, the end of apartheid in South Africa. One of the first things that Nelson Mandela did was to
Mm.
change the holidays and to make them more inclusive. And it was such a reminder that holidays and symbols really matter. They
Yes.
signal whose stories get honored, whose get quietly or violently shoved to the margins. And at the same time, we have these like very distinct episodes of violence happening in our streets every day. I mean, ICE was literally letting dogs maul a man in Tacoma this week. So none of this is abstract, right? It's part of this ecosystem of cruelty.
Exactly. Which is why, thinking back, uh, I don't know, just thinking back on 2020, post George Floyd, when we had all of these proclamations and corporate DEI pledges and kente cloth kneeling
Yes.
from elected officials.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's go Google those pictures, folks.
Yes.
You know, and then it's 5 years later. Not only have most DEI programs been dismantled, but people are claiming racial exhaustion, quote unquote, because they watched a 5-minute Ibram ex-Kendi explainer on YouTube and think they did Reconstruction, right?
Yes. There's a
I,
there's a particular sort of white subjectivity of like I did that for like 5 seconds and I checked that box and I never want to go back to it.
exactly, exactly.
I mean, certainly DEI efforts were not perfect, but it was at least a moment of attention and a pressure
Right.
valve on some of the institutional inequity and active forgetting that we had all experienced prior to that moment. And now it feels like we're just watching universities and workplaces and whole sectors roll back even the pretenses of accountability. Like I saw this week that
Right.
Head Start programs got a list of 200 words that can no longer be said by the programs, and it includes things like belonging.
I mean, it just truly is Orwellian at times, right?
Yeah,
We're living in what is, supposedly, uh, this supposedly this very free society, right? Where how long ago was it that people were screaming, particularly on the right, right? We're screaming that there's that we're overly censored on
yeah,
social media and this and that, and like where are these people now
exactly.
when it, I mean, it was obvious to me. It was always obvious that it was very asymmetrical concern. It's, you know, it was never that we wanted all people to be able to speak as freely as possible. It was like we
This
wanted
write's
some
for
people
me
to.
and not for thee, Marcus.
Exactly, exactly.
Yes.
But I mean, Nora, that that is why conversations about race, and we're talking real ones, not box checking corporate trainings, are more essential than ever. They're hard, they're uncomfortable, and they're the only path towards dismantling structures that harm everyone, including white folks who think the system is working for them, until the bill comes due, and it is coming due.
It is overdue.
Yeah,
And the exhaustion is real. We all burn out and get defensive. We feel ashamed. We need a break. But we don't get to opt out, right? We don't get to opt out of the world that we live in and the histories that we inherit. And I think the really hard work, is learning to stay in that conversation with each other without losing ourselves or losing our relationships with each other.
absolutely. Which brings us to today's guest, someone who has been doing this work with brilliance, rigor, and compassion for decades. Dr. Ralina Joseph. She's Vice Provost of Inclusive Excellence and Professor of African American Studies at UCLA. And she founded the Center for Communication, Difference, and Equity at the University of Washington, home of the Interrupting Privilege program that's reshaped how thousands of people talk about race and power.
Dr. Joseph's new book, Racial Exhaustion: How to Move Through Racism in the Wake of DEI, is basically a survival guide for exactly this moment, a moment when conversations about race are more necessary and more treacherous than ever. So let's get into it.
Dr. Joseph, thank you so much for being with us today. Your book is truly extraordinary, and it couldn't come at a better time. I will say that. Um, I also want to say that your book names something so many of us are feeling right now at this moment, but haven't had language for.
Mm.
So, when did you realize we needed the phrase racial exhaustion, and that this country was hitting a wall, and that you just had to write into that exhaustion rather than around it?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. So it really, the genesis of it was in the fall of 2016. And if you remember that the election that we thought was going to go a very different way, surprised some people, didn't surprise others, but hit a lot of spaces like Seattle's tremendously. And I think people were hit with rage, but also a feeling of frustration that was so embodied, and that felt like really the beginning of racial exhaustion. And my own experience as a communication scholar told me that actually more communication around race instead of less was going to help bring us out of this. And so that's when we launched, not in conjunction with the election, but rather because it felt like the right time. Right, this was in a moment. If we kind of go backwards, the murder of Trayvon Martin was in 2012. We had Ferguson, and then there was like a number of different televised or reported murders of Black individuals across the country. Murder of Michael Brown was in 2014, and the uprising in Ferguson. All of these different things had been happening for years and years. 2013, the birth of Black Lives Matter, to really give us this organizational frame and a way into a social media protest and in the streets protest. And so this was certainly not new for generations, but even in the last number of immediate years leading up to 2016 had been establishing where people were and what we were feeling.
Can you explain a little bit about why you wanted to talk about racial exhaustion, as you put it in the subtitle of this book, in the wake of DEI? I, we're in some kind of wake of DEI now. I don't like backlash is not strong enough a word. But
Yes.
how are you thinking about what this moment is and how racial
hmm
exhaustion relates to it now, as the book is kind of coming out into the world?
Yeah. I mean, I think that if it was something that we could name in 2016, certainly in 2020, as we have the murder of George Floyd and the racial reckoning as it becomes known hits the country. Um, at this moment, post so many things, it is a far more dramatic. Um, when I wrote the book, I didn't know there would be such a thing as a quote unquote illegal DEI. That different institutions, including higher education, would be examining themselves around. Um, but the writing was certainly on the wall that the small moment of progress that opened up, a small moment of being able to really speak in a more forthright manner about things like disparities, was gone. And and that continues every day in our worlds, right? But what I try to think about is so many of my conversations are around questions of language and language change, right? The change from DEI. But we also know that language is living. Language is never staying static. And words, even in this realm, that really meant something at a certain moment, for example, tolerance, right? In the 1960s, to think about tolerance in Dr. King's language was the highest standard. And we demand so much more than to be tolerated now, right? Our historical moment looks similar, looks different in various ways. And so part of what I'm trying to do is to think about, yes, there was especially that the E piece, the equity piece, and having that crystallized in people's minds precisely what that meant. It's hard for people to abandon. I hear a lot of people kind of really having upset, all kinds of feelings around that. But also, what I'm trying to do is to do work that doesn't just stand still in this moment, but continues to make progress by thinking about, we know that DEI was not perfect, right? And I try and name some of this, some of the ways in which those of us who've been doing this work for a while, were seen as the only people, and so we bore this extra responsibility. So I think that we can also think about this moment as one where we have a fully shared responsibility for the work, including those who have thought, well, the DEI professionals over there, the DEI experts are going to handle this. And we know that that's no longer the case. And so the truly seeing the work of inclusion for all is all of our work, I think is one of the things that I'm really aspiring towards in this moment. So it's going to look different, absolutely. But it doesn't mean that the work is ending, right?
Say absolutely. I mean, it's in some ways it seems like it's just restarted in many cases. Um, That being said, I do want to return real quickly to the title "racial exhaustion" because yeah, I think you so great, wonderfully put it in the intro about, there are some folks who are, folks of color, specifically black people, who are just tired and exhausted of constantly having to tell people about our experiences over and over and over again, only to barely be believed. And then
Mm,
on the other hand, you have white folks who will say that they're just tired of talking about racism because, they're tired of always, stumbling and saying the wrong thing and being accused of being racist, and, not, you know, uh, not having sort of their grace extended to them. And so
mm,
I want to just ask you because I mean we have listeners to our show who are of multiple stripes, shall we say, and I'm sure on that spectrum can identify with one polarity or the
mhm.
other. Um, so what do you have to say sort of about what people get wrong about the texture when what's underneath racial exhaustion?
Mhm, mhm. So I think that one of the things that I hear all the time is that this is just something that people of color need to think about and deal with, right? That this is the moment as we're seeing attacks on immigrants, as we're seeing new iterations of anti-Black racism that's rolled out every day. Um, as we're experiencing these daily attacks, that it's really only Black people, other people of color, Latinx folks who are experiencing this, right? And I think that our exhaustion needs to be attended to. Our exhaustion around having to experience this in every way, and also not being able to give voice to it. That's a part of it, right? Not having it seen or believed or invested in as a true problem. But I think that part of the issue is also that white folks need to see themselves as a part of this construct, right? First and foremost, white people have a race, and I think that the assumption can sometimes be if it has to do with anything racial, it doesn't have to do with white people, and that we need white people in this conversation. And so the kind of tapping in and tapping out that has happened is only going to increase our inequalities across all different types of spheres, and is only going to make you more tired, Marcus. And so part of what we need to do is to bring people into the conversation in a way that I think there was a small opening during some of that DEI moment where people were really trying to understand, and it was awkward at times, and kind of embarrassingly earnest, but it was there. And so to bring people back into that moment where they will be willing to um, sacrifice some of their privilege along the way, that they will be able to use their voices, to use their power, and not simply kind of throw up their own hands that this is a foregone conclusion. And I think there's so much about this moment that has gained power because of the way that it's operated on our exhaustion, right? That's made it feel as though we actually can't fight, and we need all of us in the fight. I mean, that's a little bit of what I'm trying to talk about. But even I was at an event last night, and someone say, "What's the name of your white colleague said? What's the name of your book again?" And I said, "Racial Exhaustion." And he said, "Oh, the book I'm going to write is just on exhaustion," and kind of being flip about it. Right. And I was like, okay, we're at a work dinner. I'm not going to say anything. But that kind of sense that, well, if it has to do with race, it actually doesn't have to do with me.
Yeah.
Right. And how that ends up harming all of us.
I will say he definitely needs to pick up the book. So
Yeah. One of the, I think, really deeply impactful things about your work at the University of Washington, where I also work, is a lot of institution building around having difficult conversations and pulling all sorts of people, including, your colleague who wants to write just about exhaustion, into those difficult conversations. It feels like a lot of this book comes from a place of observing how, especially a lot of white people want to have what they say are honest conversations about race, and then they kind of hit this wall of discomfort or self-blame or shame, and it just stops cold. And so how do you help people to move beyond that and also to differentiate a bit between discomfort that is generative versus actual harm that might be happening in conversations?
So I think that so your namings, the first the I go through this cycle in the book that I'm talking about is the critical communication of race, and I think one thing to note is that the dialogue piece, which a lot of people all over the place in higher education are jumping right there, dialogue is absolutely essential, and there's a lot of communication that needs to happen before dialogue. So the work that I do leans on this notion of listening differently, listening in a radical way, and then being able to. So you talked about the guilt, the shame, the listening itself is hard to put yourself into that space of open listening and to be able to identify, to name the guilt, to name the shame, and not to stay frozen by it, to understand that this is an absolutely natural emotion. It's not attached with being a bad person, but rather this is the way in which we have been taught or not taught to talk about and to deal with and to think through race. Along with, and I'm talking about race because this was at the center of the work that I do, but I think this is really true about different period. I think that the ways in which we talk about sexual orientation, that we talk about related issues of immigration, of religion today, that many of these things are end up being in that space of that third rail, right? And then after learning actual skills together in community of how to sit with discomfort, how to process through that discomfort, to then create spaces of honest speaking. And this is the cycle that I talk about is not kind of a continuous loop around, but it's always so you might work on some listening, deal with some discomfort, might go back to some listening first, some speaking, back to some listening, discomfort all the way around. And then the final step is dialogue, but that we don't get to dialogue until we've done all of the other phases of the work. And part of that is so that we're not so focused on staying stuck in our own positionalities, whatever they might be, but that you can really hold someone else's experiences, to hear their histories, to understand how they're situated institutionally and structurally, as well as to hear their story differently.
Dr. Joseph, that sounds like so much work, though. There's nothing instantaneous that'll not make us racist in like a finger snap.
You
I
don't have
mean,
a
my
pill we can
goodness.
take?
I, um, no, but that being said, Dr. Joseph, so much of this book, which I certainly appreciated, as Nora and I both live in Seattle. Obviously, you you know, most recently lived in Seattle. Now you're obviously down in Southern California. But Seattle is sort of the backdrop for much of the narration of this book, and I thought how brilliant that was, just also in the sense that this is supposedly this progressive utopia that we have out here, where we've got it right. I think your book cites this, that we were the city, we were third or something, that behind Detroit and Washington D.C. in terms of giving our votes to the Democratic nominee for president in 2016, as well as 2024. And so I wonder how Seattle sort of shaped not just your writing of this book, but also your work, right? In the sense of if this is supposed to be quote unquote the epitome and the exceptional city and exceptional space when it comes to race relations, and yet obviously I can attest that it is not. um how did the city sort of shape how you have navigated racial
Hmm.
exhaustion?
Yeah. So until I moved here to LA, Seattle was my only job. I went there straight from grad school, and I came with a PhD in ethnic studies. Uh, I knew how to speak race in particular ways, not just as a person of color, but as a scholar. And so coming to a city that as you point out, is so incredibly electorally progressive, and yet felt like the place where race talk was silenced more than anywhere else that I had lived. And at that point, I had lived in the DC area, in Providence, Rhode Island, in Miami, in San Diego, in Oakland, and Seattle felt really different from all of those places. Now, I think what's interesting is that the country has continued to go towards the way of Seattle in terms of race talk. But at that moment, in 2005, when I moved to Seattle, uh, I think I stepped in it a lot because I wanted to, and I thought that it was normal to talk about race in mixed company, as we say, and it was absolutely not. And so that I thought was just odd. And I was trying to make this place my home. I didn't want to just move somewhere for a year. And we didn't. We were living there for 20 years. And so I was just working really hard to try and figure out what is going on in this place where so many people in such a white majority city. And so the vast majority of folks just couldn't talk about race. And that's where, and I mean, that's why I started a racial dialoguing program and a center that was focused on it and where so much of my research comes from. But yes, Seattle is essential here.
I'm just a quick follow up on that. Why is it you think so hard
Mm.
for a place like Seattle that has is predominantly white, predominantly progressive? We must like per capita, we must have the most brunch time liberals, so to speak, out of anywhere in the country. And it just seems so hard at times to truly have open and vulnerable, quite frankly, conversations around race.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that there's something, well, first off, because Seattle is indeed, or has been, it's getting more diverse in certain ways and then also not in others because we know that it gets more and more expensive and people are forced out of the city. But I think that a lot of people didn't grow up next to people of color, right? That residential segregation is just as real in Seattle as it is in just about every major city in the country. And then with our numbers being so low, that was even more of a reality. So that's the first piece. If you don't know someone who occupies a position of difference and your only reference point is going to be kind of them over there in the newspapers, on TV, or whatever it might be, you're not going to have that level of comfort, right? You might not have ever had that conversation. And I think that another piece of it is that the guilt, the shame piece that Nora named, is also very much a part of kind of the progressive liberal ethos. And so I always felt like it was like a not a polite topic. So we wouldn't talk about race because I would never want to offend anybody. So that's also this the assumption that race talk is always a negative thing as well. Um, that that race is something that I can't have I as a white person could not have any type of expertise on. So I need to like close my mouth and not say anything as opposed to enter in a vulnerable way the conversation. So I think that, I think much of it stems from I think what many people would say is a really sweet urge to not offend, but that means for many of us that attempt at not offending also means that we feel invisible, right? That we don't feel seen. And we know, of course, Seattle still has incredible racial disparities. So it's not as though the kind of erasing of race talk means that it's the erasing of different racialized experiences in our schools, in our healthcare, in our media, in all of the places that create our lives.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about the importance of recognizing white as a race and as a cultural norm, and certainly the guilt piece of that is big, right? Like it's a big cultural inheritance for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
white people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I think one of the most powerful concepts in this book is the one that you're positioning around radical listening and what that really takes as a participant in these really challenging conversations. You argue that radical listening requires us not just to hear what the other person is saying, but to also listen to ourselves, right? To listen
Mm,
to that guilt or the stories we have inherited, the defenses that go straight up when we're hearing other people. So, what does radical listening look like to you in practice, especially across racial and generational lines? But I would also say, sorry, this is a very long question, but also like in this moment, this
mm,
supercharged moment, what does
mm-hmm.
that radical listening look like?
That's a great question. So radical listening comes from critical pedagogy scholars and thinking about the types of listening that really emerge from classroom spaces that bring us towards freedom, towards liberation. And this concept was brought to me by a graduate student who I was working with. I'm going to give her a shout out, Anjali Brecky, who is now a professor at the University of Wisconsin Parkside and is doing wonderful work of her own on radical listening. And in radical listening, the workshops that we would hold, we always start with the advice to tell people to try and be conscious of their own positionality, but really work to hold someone else's story. And so, as you were saying, that means that you're working hard not to argue against someone, not even to co sign what they're saying, because even in that moment of, I really identify with you, you're switching back to your own story. So you're really trying to fully hold someone else in the ways in which they're trying to be heard. What it looks like in practice is turning off your devices and really making sure that you're tuned in such a way that you are not distracted. Distraction is not neutral. Distraction, we know, is one of the factors that leads us towards implicit bias. For example, distraction and being rushed brings us to all kinds of negative assumptions. And so to work on hearing the person, to slow down. So much of this is really slow work. I mean, you were joking, Marcus, we can't snap our fingers, but no, this is about us investing in the time and giving someone. I talk about some of the work that talks about the giving someone the respect of royalty, right? As you're listening to them there. And then from there, not assuming that what they have said is what you have heard. And so saying, so Marcus, Nora, I hear you saying X. Did I get that right? And without judgment, without assessment, and then leaving the space for someone to say, well, yeah, actually, you got that right, but I really want to clarify this other piece, right? And letting that sit there. Um, the goal of radical listening is not to persuade anybody. It's not to even begin having a dialogue. It's simply to fully hear someone. And you might, from that step on, move into dialogue. I have my own positions on persuasion, uh, but really to kind of to leave listening as its own aspiration and its own skill, because I think we are so lacking of that deep, slow listening that we need to really connect with each other. Period. Regardless of what we're working towards. I mean, we know that we're in this epidemic of loneliness, for example, and this is one of the ways that we combat that as well. This is one of the ways that we connect as humans.
No, absolutely. I was just as you were talking, I was listening. I was listening. No, but I was, but what it evoked for me though too was just the fact that I mean as you alluded to, like we live in this quote unquote attention economy where there's this sort of arms race of catching somebody's interest within the span, of 5 seconds, are
Mm-hmm.
are being scared to lose them, and so I'm wondering how antithetical, right, radical listening is even just to this frenzied lifestyle that we've,
Yeah.
I don't want to say that we've cultivated. Most of us have had it thrust upon us, right? But
Mm-hmm.
how can you imagine we sort of just take back our time in order to even have space for these type of interactions where we can radically listen?
Mm, mm, mm. I think that unplugging is huge. Literally turning off the phone, turning off the computer, turning off all of the things that are dinging for your attention constantly, and naming that as a practice. And I think that this is something that we need to be doing at our schools, that we need to do at our dinner tables, that we need to do in all the spaces where we're connecting, that we need to be doing in our workplaces to see each other, as we know that our colleagues are often feeling frustrated, exhausted, disconnected as well. But it's not easy, right? And especially people in many of our types of careers where you're listening, but you're listening and thinking about what's my response going to be, right? You're listening, thinking about how do I formulate my question. So you're not really listening. So it also is about being okay with not having a smart response right away, right? And leaving space for that. And then again, maybe naming it as, let's just try and do this and see how it feels. But the results from what we've seen create a really different type of connection with each other, in that the connection, Nora, as you were talking about before, across generation. So particularly for the types of people that you might not have a shorthand form of communication with, right? Who really need to hear you and to hear your story, across race, across lines that you might not always cross. To really lean into that space of, I'm going to be empty as possible and curious as possible, as I move into this conversation. And that might be about me embracing silence, right?
Right, and Dr. Joseph, sort of what I'm hearing from you too, I guess to use the language is just that it's ultimately antithetical to a performance, right? Because so often in social interactions, we're performing, right? We want to say the right thing. To your point, we want to say something witty. We want to uh, be the smartest person in the room, so to speak. And this is truly antithetical to that, where to quote Bruce Lee, I guess, right? We're just water, right? We're just there.
Um, yes. Yeah. You have to not be smart. You can't rely on those kind of position statements. And I mean, if you've ever been to uh, a talk of academics, someone will stand up and do 5 minutes on whatever they're thinking about or their research or what, and then have almost a throwaway question that's really about, how can you answer this question for me,
Hmm.
as opposed to, how does this actually engage in what what the other person has been sharing for that period of time.
Yeah, I mean, your comments are invoking the particular violence I think that happens within academic conversation and communication in particular. Marcus and I have been thinking a lot as we've been making this podcast this year about what this kind of moment in time demands of all of us. And I think we've had a lot of conversations about what it demands in terms of our listening, but also in terms of our speaking. And so I was
Mm,
hoping we could pivot a little bit to what the book is saying to people about radical speaking, and what you're thinking about and wanting from people in terms of acts of radical speaking in
mm,
this moment that asks of so much bravery from so
mhm,
many of us.
mhm, mhm. Thank you. Yes. So radical speaking is a really important partner to radical listening. And then so after sitting with discomfort, it's the really basic idea of being able to speak truth to power, which feels really impossible in a lot of settings now, where we are crossing out our words with red ink. I mean, like literally in different ways. Uh, and so I think we need to figure out the spaces where we still can and should speak that truth to power. What this means is, I try and give some language around interrupting microaggressions. And in the workshop that I did, this was one of the big components. I feel like, Marcus, you might have been there for one of those sessions many, many years ago. And part of what we want to do is to empower people who are experiencing those everyday forms of discrimination into having some language that feels like they can protect themselves. They can enact some kind of interpersonal power in that moment, instead of feeling like this is going to knock me down off of kind of whatever tenuous perch I'm on right now. And I think that we have so much fear in this moment, and rightfully so in some spaces. And also, um, the fear is something that is a self-perpetuating force, right? That we hear the fear, we feel the anxiety, and that shuts us up in certain ways instead of using our language to fight. And so part of what I'm trying to do is to just give people that continued encouragement to fight, and to fight for themselves, to fight for your sisters and brothers across race, across generation, um, and to treat each other like we would want the healthiest family to be looking out for each other, instead of discarding these moments as just incidental. When we know that the research of the amazing sociologist William Smith from the University of Utah, who writes on racial battle fatigue, tells us that these are the interactions that actually kill us, that they kill us slowly. This is why, um, we have certain populations that have disproportionate levels of high blood pressure, of cortisol that's surging through our bodies. And so part of the goal in this radical speaking is thinking about how do we stop those moments so that they stop accumulating for the person over there, right? As I'm observing it, or for myself.
Yeah, and say in terms of radical speaking, one of the many things that I
Mhm.
appreciate about it, the interrupting privilege initiative here is that it you all also record some of the interactions between folks, right? And thought that was so great for one of the reasons is that it's great that folks of color don't have to continuously reiterate their stories. People can just they can click a link and they can hear it as many times as they need to hear it without
Mhm.
somebody being re-traumatized. But also, and you bring this up in the book, there's an interaction that you had between two white people. They were fairly affluent professionals who allows you to record them being vulnerable about them interrogating not just the racism of some of their family members but their own racism. And I'm wondering, I mean, I know you still have to sell the book. We do we're all capitalist apologists as much as leftists as we are, but without getting too detailed into that, could you just tell how instructive those type of interactions are, particularly for this dominant white culture that we live in here in this country?
Yeah, it is so important for white people to have conversations about race with each other. And I did not have a whole lot of takers on my request, so I was incredibly grateful to those who said yes. And actually, the conversation that I share, um, that might be the beginning of the radical speaking chapter, is one where they wanted me to come in and to do some work with their group, and they were the ones who said we're willing to be the guinea pigs here. And what you see in that conversation is their incredible discomfort, but working really hard to stay in it. And there was a little bit of creating some kind of heroes out of themselves for having the conversations and doing the work, and identifying their families as being the ones holding the racial animus. And I kind of continue the story and say, when I went back to them and I said, hey, but what about you? There was a stop and a pause. So part of that is also saying these conversations need to happen, certainly with groups of people, and then they need to be shared out and so that other folks can weigh in as well, and that they need to not just happen once, right? I think that's what's the really important piece here, and I think that's part of the difficulty in white racial fluency is that they didn't grow up having the conversations that you might have had at the dinner table, Marcus, or that I might have had at the dinner table. They just they haven't built up that same muscle. And so to think about this as being the muscle that you are always building up, that you're always developing, and that it's not, I think this is part of the confusion sometimes interracially around race as well, that talking about race is not always a painful thing. Talking about race is fun and and all kinds of ways of connecting, and can be maddening and hilarious, and all of the different ways that we can see each other across racialized experiences. And so to find those spaces as well, of talking about and understanding whiteness, as well as understanding all of the different dimensions of racialized difference.
I mean, there's liberation for all of us in those conversations, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Um, I think sometimes in our conversations around race in this country, it's hard to imagine what a future that is evolved to be something better could look like. And so I wanted to ask you to help us envision what kind of a future would this look like if we had learned to really practice that critical communication of race, that radical listening and speaking in our institutions or in our everyday life? Can you give us an example of what that looks like or a vision?
Yeah, I think that what that looks like is people in moments of conflict not running off to their camps, but rather staying in the conversation together. I think that that looks like people feeling truly included. So the sense of do I belong here has to begin with am I listened to? Do I hear my story being seen, being acknowledged? Um, I think this also has to be reflected in all of our spaces where we know that our representation matters, right? This has to be reflected in spaces where so that I know that my teachers can look like me as they're listening to me. Right. I know this is true with my healthcare professionals, with my elected officials, in all of the spaces. And I think that starting off with this slow process of listening and increasing who do we see as our human family, who is us, is something that ideally happens through this process. That it's not about trying to turn uh, difference into them, all of them over there, but it's about how do I bring more people into my understanding of who is us here. And that's not flattening out difference. That's not ignoring difference. It's about hearing it and holding it and talking through it and strategizing about the ways in which it holds us down and keeps us apart.
Yeah, I I want to before Nora asks the final question here. Like I do want to ask Dr. Joseph. We live in this time period, right, where just over this past week we've had yeah, there's a ton of pettiness, but I would say that it was fairly petty that the president made it that it's no longer free to go to the national parks on Martin Luther King Day as well as Juneteenth. But instead, we get to go for free on his birthday. And obviously, it's fairly obvious that those are the only two holidays that he did that to. Those are the only two holidays that, um, you know, ex- uh, explicitly are celebrated, that celebrate Black culture. They celebrate a Black icon. We continue to have clawbacks of DEI and so forth. We can, whether that's the institutions or businesses, hell, even even some local municipalities. And so I wonder, as these conversations become and dialogues become harder and harder to have publicly, where you do have to in some ways sacrifice something, right? You do have to, institutions. in order to have them, in many times have to actually stand up for their values as opposed to stand down. How do we sort of galvanize and unify and find solidarity around needing to have these conversations that aren't easy to have, and yet they are so necessary to
Mm,
what, to the question that Nora asked about, like, essentially facilitating a future that is
mhm,
much better than our present right now.
mhm. Yes. Yeah. The bald and petty racism and the anti-blackness in particular is astounding right now, right? And you named just the two things that happened this week. The targeting of Somali folks, and of which, there's a vibrant Somali community in Seattle, is just what's happened in the last week, right? Last week and a half. And I think that people are pretty, I mean, people that I'm talking to are, yes, exhausted, but also they're feeling like they want some solutions. They want some way forward. I hear this all the time. I'm sure you all hear this too. How can we make our way out of this together? And so I think that we need to really talk about, we need to just learn how to communicate differently to start out, period, first. And I think that the hard work that it takes to kind of start the conversations is almost immediately met by the relief of and the joy and exhilaration of actually being able to connect with another human being. This is how we kind of learn how to be alive, is by hearing each other's stories, by making that space of connection. And so I think that it takes people saying, we need to do this now. Lots of universities are really leaning into dialogue programs, which I applaud, and I hope that they slow down a little bit too. Um, but thinking about this as an essential skill set, that we need to have radical listening, that we need to really learn how to sit with discomfort. We need to do all these different pieces together, and how can we normalize this work? And I always talk about what Michelle Obama talks about as the power of the small. We talk about our circles of influence, so that as opposed to expecting or hoping that it's going to happen somewhere out there and somewhere with someone who has a much bigger group and can do things differently, that you start with your own immediate space and you grow that outward. It's a very kind of a thinking about community organizing way of communication, but I think that it's been shown to work. So in our moments of frustration, to go towards the pieces that really work for us and teach those out, grow them, and learn how to really come together differently in this moment.
You're engaging in this work as a scholar and a writer and a public thinker, a mentor, a leader, and this work is so hard. And it's hard even in the good times, right? I can't imagine the kinds of exhaustion that it comes with in this moment in time. So one of the things that Marcus and I try to be intentional about is how we sort of replenish our practices of joy and energy. Do you mind sharing with us anything you do to replenish your joy and keep yourself away from that edge of exhaustion?
Yes. Well, I'm often very clear about I am not great at doing this for myself. So I'm trying. I know that it's something that needs to be done. I also know about all of the disproportionate health impacts on women of color, and particularly those who literally were doing the same types of jobs that I do. So for me, what I try and remind myself to do, at least, is to stop, to pause, and to connect. And so my family is so important. My partner of almost 30 years, our two kids who are 20 and 22, and to whom I'm, dedicating this book. But sharing with them in really vulnerable ways exactly what I'm going through. I also have an amazing circle of Black women friends who I can go to with any types of questions anytime or share whatever I need. And so that those spaces have been so important. Uh, and I know that I also need to do a better job myself of slowing down, of taking the time, of unplugging. Um, and it's a constant challenge for all of us, I think, to, you said you have to remind each other of this. And so that's one of the ways that I think we show our love is really by the community care of trying to remind each other and to um bring each other together in healthier, slower spaces around community care. But I would love to hear what you all do as well.
We're works in progress is what we do.
Absolutely.
Some weeks are better than others.
Well, Dr.
Fair.
Joseph, Dr. Joseph, thank you so, so much. For our listeners, to remind them again, the book is Racial Exhaustion. Give it to folks you love. And even those you are, maybe on the fence about, just give it to anybody in your life. It is an extraordinary book. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wow. So, Nora, I think one of the many myriad great things about Dr. Joseph's work is the fact that, even though, obviously her work is centering race about, and how she's conducting these conversations, there's so much to her approach that can be, used in just everyday interpersonal conversations, whether it's about race, whether it's about gender, whether it's about disagreement amongst community members. I will tell you that I have definitely, had had to use this in conversations that I've had, whether it's been in attempting to repair relationally with people within community, or even right just interrogate
Yeah.
uh, my own shortcomings, whether it was around conversations of gender and so on and so forth.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, at a time when there's just so many dimensions of harm happening to people, it feels particularly important that we're able to truly listen to the harm that other people are experiencing and also be able to give voice to it ourselves. Um, it was a conversation that also connected to so many other conversations that we've had across this year
Yes.
that I was really fired up about thinking about all the different points of constellation with other folks that we've talked to.
Absolutely. And I just think, in terms of us wanting to try to give people practical advice and knowledge with which they can, go back into to the world and, attempt, attempted to make it, quite frankly, a better place and be armed with the tools to have these conversations that are very difficult and as we mentioned throughout this episode, extremely uncomfortable. I think Dr. Joseph's work is essential to doing that. And so I would recommend everybody again. And I promise you, I'm not getting residuals from this book, but like, please go out and get
Yeah.
this book. It is life altering,
Yeah.
and as well as life affirming.
Yeah.
I will say that no matter what your race is.
Yeah. Such a beautiful contribution. Yeah. Should we turn to our 8 ounces of joy?
Yes, yes, we shall,
Okay.
Nora. What you want me to go first, or do you? I think.
I'm actually gonna go first because mine is
Okay.
so silly and inconsequential this week because I'm having a week. So it's not very
When aren't
good.
we, Nora?
Yeah.
When aren't we all?
Yeah.
No.
So I'm hoping that yours is super meaningful like usual, and then we can end on that note.
All right. You're hoping for a lot this week, but
No
anyway.
pressure. uh, no, so I took my kid to her annual pediatrician appointment, and we I didn't realize this, but she qualified for the HPV vaccine, which
Oh,
now kids get super young, and I like the public health nerd in me just got so excited. Like because this is like a vaccine that didn't exist when you and I were kids, and it
Mm,
prevents so much cancer, and it's so safe.
yes,
And
yes.
I, I, I didn't know if she was actually gonna hit the age to get it before RFK and the ghouls in chief
Mm, right.
actually like took away access to it. And I just had this moment of being like, science is metal, you know? Like
Yes,
like
yes,
it is
yes.
so cool sometimes. And I felt this like fierce protectiveness of science in that moment and appreciation for it. And I I just think there's not a lot to cling to these days in public health. There's a lot of bad, but the fact that things like that exist and prevent our kids from having cancer is pretty awesome. Um,
Yeah, I would say that that's not a trivial thing at all, Nora. So I think you had a very impactful
okay, well,
8 ounces of joy.
also
I am joyful for
thank
you
you.
as well.
My daughter, on the other hand, was not joyful, and she tried to like fight off this medical assistant who was trying to give her a vaccine. So we're still working on that part of the public health acceptance in my family.
Well, thankfully, this is your 8 ounces of joy, not hers. So,
Exactly.
there you go. um, mine actually, this is kind of a trivial thing, I'll say, but so a friend of mine, he is a huge horror movie fan, and he kept telling me that I needed to watch the new Frankenstein movie that is
I've heard such good
buried
things.
on Netflix,
Yes.
by the way. But I guess they spent $150 million on this movie that is I'll be honest, I think is a masterpiece, and it had like a super short theatrical run. I think it was in the movie theaters for like maybe a weekend, and then got booted from the theaters, and now I it's buried deep on Netflix somewhere. But what got me really into it was I was listening to a scholar talk about the feminist and social scholarship around
Yes.
Frankenstein, which was written by Mary Shelley when she was, I think, 16 years
Yeah.
old. Which what am I doing with my life, by the way? Um, but she wrote it as she wrote it not just for the takeaway that everybody sort of I guess sort of the pop culture the I shouldn't say pop culture takeaway, but the takeaway that is most popular, which is that when you play God, right, it can be dangerous because of the monsters you create. But it was actually more so around around in the 18th century how women and other marginalized groups were being treated, and
Yes.
it was basically saying what is the society's responsibility, to these groups that it is created in the way that it has treated them
Hmm.
when it is casting them away, and then it wants to be so up in arms, when these groups are, demanding justice for them, right, it's
Mm.
themselves, or when they are, um, seeking justice, are doing things that can, might be seemed as a sort of antisocial behavior, right? Are can be seen as simply, breaking laws in order to locate justice. And I just thought about how, in watching the movie with that context, and just thinking about Frankenstein, it made me so much even more appreciative, I should say, for arts and film and uh, books that aren't just IP, intellectual property that you make like the Marvel universe or the Tyler Perry movie, or uh, those Netflix films that are algorithmically constructed so that you don't have to pay attention to them. You can be doing whatever and it's just on in the background. But it just made me so much more appreciative for the I'll say the what we're losing in with some of the what we're losing in with sort of our cultural
Hmm.
storytelling,
Yeah.
that we're we're seeing fewer and fewer, at least produced for a mass audience, I'll say, fewer and fewer y- films and art that's truly art, not just content.
Yeah.
And so it made me very appreciative. Like if you get a chance, and for those who have Netflix, or if you just want to do the what is it the churn and return kind of thing where you buy it for a month and then you click off or you cancel your subscription. It's well worth watching that movie with and I'll say with that added context about how it relates to our society currently.
Yeah.
So
That's one of my
yeah.
favorite books, actually, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Um,
Y- Yeah, and it's actually not a long book.
no,
You can get through it pretty
yeah,
quickly.
that's why it's my favorite,
Yeah.
because
I know you hate reading, Nora, so.
I know. It's actually my least favorite activity.
Well, on that note, hopefully there will be no monsters for us, figuratively or literally to report on by next week.
Oh
But
yeah,
I wouldn't bet on that, unfortunately.
more reasons
That
to
being
tune
said,
in, everyone.
yes, yes. Anyhow, that being said, folks, let's go ahead and sign on off here for today. My people, we made it through another week with our sanity mostly intact, like 71% intact, which still counts as passing in America. So truly congratulations to all of us.
Exactly. We're a pass fail country right now, so we'll take what we can get. And if you'd like to keep us from fully unraveling on air, please consider tossing a donation our way at inthemeanwhilepodcast.com. You can think of it as preventative care for all of us.
Oh, yes. And a huge thanks to today's guest, Ralina Joseph, for bringing her brilliance, her book, and frankly, the emotional intelligence all of us so desperately need in
Amen.
this day and age. As always, gratitude to our producer, Jessica Partnow, who keeps the ship afloat, and to Aham Aluo for the music that tricks you into believing we have our lives together.
You can catch In the Meanwhile on KVRU Wednesdays at 5 or listen to full episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, basically anywhere you doom scroll.
And new episodes drop every single Friday. Until then, we'll see you in the meanwhile.